Um, Again, my name is Kiacha Benson, and I got to be honest with you, I have been working on this speech for probably a couple of months now, and it's been quite a journey. I literally threw my speech away yesterday, and I feel like what I'm going to give to you is probably much better than what I had prepared for months and months, and so I really, I hope that comes through. The most remarkable part of the speech that I created for you guys was actually not the speech itself, but really the process. And because I had been working in racial justice, social justice for so long, or healing from social justice healing from racism for so long, I'd never really had a chance to sit down and reflect on everything that I have gone through my entire life and really evaluate it. And I did it for a couple of reasons. I did it because I wanted to give you guys a really good speech, but I also really care about my audience and the words that come out of my mouth and the way that it affects you guys. I've given speeches before about racism, and it has unfortunately not always been great because I was struggling with racism for so long that my intent for what I had to say and what I had to share with people was coming from a different place. And so in my evaluation of my speech to you today, I really wanted to give some care to that and care to you guys. And the reason why is because when we engage in talking about race or racism, it's always a really difficult subject. It has some very severe consequences in some cases. And if you don't speak about it in a way that is respectful for yourself and for others, it can hurt, and it can hurt deeply, and it can alienate the people that are listening or even yourself. And so begins my process of evaluating what I'm going to share to you today and what I've gone through in this process of trying to craft this speech for you. It brought me all the way back to some of my closest relationships. When I was growing up, I had two really good friends. Their names were Robin and Marin. I absolutely loved them. And they're two white girls. And I went out to school in Kiacha High School. And it was a unique experience for me. I'm Alaska Native, and being in a predominantly white environment, it took me a lot longer to develop my racial identity. And I grew up thinking that we were all alike, and our differences were beautiful, and pretty much just the general narrative that we hear about race, and really believing it. And I still, to a certain effect, I do still really believe that. But what I failed to understand in the beginning of my identity development, in the beginning of my racial identity development, was that I was different, and to not acknowledge that I was different because of the experiences that I had and how different it was from my peers, it affected me and the way that we connected and had shared experiences, or the lack thereof. And so, even though those were my two best friends, the ones that I absolutely loved and had developed an identity that I really valued, and I really value to this day, because they were so beautiful and they were so creative, and I felt, creative and that spiritual side when I was around them. But things started to change for us because of the environment around us and the way that I was treated and the way that I was treated differently from them, and the way that the world responded to them in really positive ways, positive, empowering ways, which were vastly different than the way that I experienced life. But things really got serious at a particular point in time, which was, as we got older, it wasn't just little things that were different. It wasn't preference, being preferred over me, which, I could get over. It was being in really dangerous areas where they didn't see it. And when I would be in a situation where I felt danger and I didn't know why, I felt like, and I couldn't put words to it, which was the thing. I just knew that it was uncomfortable and I shouldn't be there, and that if I remained there, that bad things could happen to me. And so we started drifting apart, and I think there was a real deep sadness that came with that with my friends, because years later they would say, we drifted apart, and it was really a sad thing for me. And I didn't really know how to explain it to them because I didn't really know what I was going through at the time. But when I look back, and as I read through books that describe racial identity, I begin to realize that was absolutely necessary for me to pull away from them, because not only, one, I was in dangerous situations where I could have actually been hurt being around the same type of people that they were hanging around, because of the way that they looked at me, because of the way they would spit in my general direction, and they wouldn't see it, and because of the hatred that I saw in people's eyes when I was around. And so I began to internalize it, think that there was something really wrong with me. And it wouldn't be until years, much longer away, that I would begin to realize and uncover why I was responding to my environment the way that I was. So, when I was in high school, I drew this picture of myself. And I don't know if you guys can really see it because it's kind of washed out, but I didn't, because I was so disconnected from my feelings and what I was going through. When I drew this, and I knew it was me, when I drew this, I didn't know why that was me. Why wasn't it someone smiling? Why wasn't this someone who had flowers in her hair and was in the sunshine? And as I got older, I began to really realize what that was about and the way that I felt in my environment. And so, the years would go on, and high school ended, whatever, and now I was spending more time building that racial identity that I didn't have a chance to do before. And while it was a really rewarding experience, it was also a really painful experience too, because I was suddenly more aware of the things that the world around me in a way that I hadn't before. And because I was somewhat isolated, living in Eagle River, and being taught, the common narrative that Americans are taught about equality, and that, we can all pick ourselves up by our bootstraps and make ourselves out of something, I didn't really realize that the inequity out there was very stark. It was exactly what my picture was depicting. It was these disparities between justice for Alaska Native women. And one thing that was going on with me in that particular time of my life which was around the beginning of 2000, 2001, and 1999, a lot of Alaska Native women were suddenly going missing or being murdered, and it felt like it was with impunity. And we already know the statistics about Alaska Native people, Alaska Native women rather, in regards to rape and domestic violence and all those kind of things. But for me, that was very real because I have survived sexual abuse. I personally internalized what was going on out in Anchorage when I would see those headlines on Alaska Native women missing. And it was a sad time for me because, and I was actually suffering a lot from rage because of the things that I would see in the headlines. And the only way that I could process it really was to just write about it and talk about it. But then eventually I got into a class on healing racism. And this was like maybe a couple years later, and it was a really remarkable experience for me because this is the first time that I actually got to have my feelings validated in a way that it couldn't be, because other people had really bought into the story that we were all equal, and that, if you were suffering, then it was somehow your issue, that you would cause this. And I got into this class where there were all people of color, and white people, and gay people. It was very diverse, and I got to hear a lot of different things that made me realize a lot of different things about myself. So it was a really healing and great moment for me, and I felt really inspired to keep it going. But I was still young, and I was a young mother, and the only thing that I could think of was to pass this on to my son. And this is my son. It was quite a while ago. His name is Damien. He's just the sweetest boy ever. And what we try to instill in him and teach him is to be more of an activist, to be out there standing up for your convictions. And I realize that he is a child in this, and he doesn't really have political beliefs. But he was still involved, and he was learning from us, just by example. But eventually, this was just not enough for me. Teaching my son and being more aware of the social dynamics that lead to inequity in our society. And so so there was a lot going on around the time that I started feeling really motivated to do something else. And this was years later after I had taken a class. And the one thing that I didn't mention, which is really important for me to tell you right now to give it context, is back in 2000, before I even took the class, there were not only just a string of people, Alaska Native women, who were dying and being murdered, but in 2000, Joshua Wade had bragged about what he had done to Della Brown in the shed. And to an Alaska Native woman hearing that, an Alaska Native woman at that, who has survived from sexual abuse, it was even more dehumanizing to hear, to see that in the newspaper, and then even after that, more dehumanizing Fast forward to 2003, when he was acquitted. And I had a lot of rage about that because he had bragged about it. And so, and then fast forward, right after he gets out of jail, he, about a month and a half later, kills a white woman, and everybody rallied to find this guy, whoever killed her, Mindy Schloss, and then they found him, and it turned out to be Joshua Wade, and I was even further enraged. I was so mad, and then what happens is he is convicted, and I was like, see, that is exactly what I'm talking about. That is exactly why I work, why I'm enraged. And not too much longer, or in the same span of time, in April of 2008, the KFOX comments happened, and the entire community rallied to try to get some justice and bring some awareness to that too. But it wasn't until through all of my travels that I was trying to find some forgiveness for that. And it wasn't until actually this morning when I actually found it, when I was searching through some newspapers and looking at some of the outcomes and some of the narrative that was to why that had happened the way that it had happened, and why those decisions were made. And so, what I want to leave you on is with this concept that my journey through healing racism was a really difficult one, and I actually ended up losing friendships over it, or being pulled in different ways because we no longer had that shared experience. But it really took me, this process of building the speech for you, it took me through a journey where I realized that in order to heal from racism, I really had to talk about it. And oh man, I've got 15 seconds to wrap this up. I really, in order for our community to have healed from these experiences, we needed to just talk about it, and those experiences were offered, but I do believe that if we had more of those opportunities, we could really pull together as a community and heal together. Thank you.